Today, The Observer published this article, The Private Trials of Keir Starmer. And it's a very strange thing, because what they're trying to do is humanize Keir Starmer in order to launder his reputation, or to drag his reputation out of the gutter. But the problem is, nothing in this actually suggests that he is worthy of redemption, and we never get any actual answers about any of the things that he says. So the main takeaway people have had from this is that he comes out, and in fact they say it in the first line here, deeply regrets his Island of Strangers speech. Now, you might remember back on the 12th of May that immigration was a hot topic in the national debate, and so they put out their immigration white paper, and Keir Starmer gave this speech. And to be honest with you, it was fine. It was actually a good speech. He points out that, in fact, it was indeed the Conservative government that really allowed net immigration to get to 1 million, the population of Birmingham, and it was chaos, and this was not what people asked for. People had asked for control, and frankly, they just want an end to immigration at this point. And he goes on and uses language that I actually think was very interesting, and I suppose everyone found provocative, but I think it was correct. Nations depend on rules, fair rules. Sometimes they're written down, often they're not, but either way, they give shape to our values. They guide us towards our rights, of course, but our responsibilities also, and the obligations we owe to one another. Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. Now, this is something many people point out was a bit late for that, Mr. Starmer. I don't recognise a shared we with the British, the native British, and most of the strangers who are here. Right, all of the Boris wave and some of the ethnically particular communities who have cloistered themselves together. I don't recognise a shared we. Right, these people feel like they're occupying parts of our country, not that they have integrated into the nation. So I don't even think we have a diverse nation. What we have is a scarred nation that has the colonies of foreign peoples living on our soil, and they know that they're foreign peoples. They define themselves as such, so they're not really part of our we. And so this is definitely a very ivory tower perspective, but it's also, well, true, right? Notice the kind of language. An island of strangers is emotive, relational language, right? This is talking about the real content of human relations. Prior to about 1997, Britain was an incredibly homogenous place. It was probably, I think it was about 91% native when Tony Blair took over. And so you would have a hard time finding foreigners in the country, non-English, Welsh, or Scottish in the country. And when you did find these people, they were mostly from London, sometimes from Manchester or Birmingham. But they were also heavily integrated culturally because they just had no choice but to be. You couldn't not be surrounded by British culture. And so there was no way that you could set up your own little enclaves and escape it and be affected by the nature of the culture. So when you spoke to a black British person from the 1990s, they just seemed like a normal British person. So they didn't feel like strangers. But that's the important part, is the fact that you felt like you had a national relationship with that person. And so they weren't an offensive person to be around. Whereas when I see burkas walking down my street, and I see them all the time now, or just random foreigners who have just arrived here in the Boris Way from anywhere in the world, they are strangers. They don't speak our language, they don't care about our customs, they don't have a history here, and they don't want a history here. And so we are absolutely an island of strangers with those people here. And frankly, I just don't want it. I just want them to go home. And so this is one of the things that he's addressing in this. And it's very interesting. I mean, the whole thing is framed as if Keir Starmer is not actually the author of his own behaviour, that he is somehow the victim of all of these things that have been done to him. Whereas he's the one who chose his responses. He chose how he would respond after Southport. He chose to demonise people. I mean, he chose to be the Prime Minister, and then the complaint is, can the Starmers have a normal life? Well, up until a point, but actually we can't really. It's like, well, yeah, but you chose to become the Prime Minister. Of course, you're not going to have a normal life when you're in charge of the country. But this is just one of those things where it's like, I don't know why Keir Starmer thought this wasn't going to be difficult. Like, he goes on to talk about how difficult it is to be in the cabinet office, and the fact that he can't just think out loud and say, yeah, sure, whatever you say is going to be taken and seized upon by whoever hears it, and I'm sure that you've got a very leaky cabinet, as everyone does. He goes on to talk about the various problems and scandals that he's been involved in. For example, the appointment of Sue Gray, who was earning more than he was, as the number 10 head honcho. And he admits, yep, I made the wrong call there. I mean, it was my call, my judgment, and I got that wrong. She was the wrong person for the job. So, yep, okay. Then he gets a bit worked up about the gifts scandal, where he was basically saying, oh, we're going to have clean, proper politics, and he sits there taking tens of thousands of pounds of gifts, and what are essentially just bribes, right? He said, no rules were broken and no public money was spent, and no favours given in return. Yeah, well, I'm sure you would say that, but you're getting, free tickets to, a thing. His wife got $5,000 worth of clothes, stuff like this, and it amounted to more than $100,000, if I recall correctly. So it's like, look, man, you can say, oh, we're going to bring decency back to politics, or whatever it is you were saying, but, everyone can see that it's just business as usual, and you're just, you're just taking the same bribes, the same slush that everyone else was taking. It's nothing new. Absolutely nothing new. He talks about how his brother died of cancer in the beginning, in January this year, which obviously is terrible. But when you're in your 60s, well, this is the sort of thing that happens to the people you know, I'm afraid. My dad's lost a bunch of his brothers now to cancer and various other things, and it's what happens as you get old. Family members begin dying, and that is obviously terrible. But I'm sorry, you can't use it as a sort of shield behind which to hide. It's not acceptable as the Prime Minister. Anyway, he carries on and says, they say this capacity to keep intense feelings bottled up may stand him in good stead in a time when global politics are more fragile than anyone else. So, of course, this is where things are getting heated in Ukraine and, of course, in the Middle East. And Starmer was surprisingly servile towards Donald Trump, unlike other world leaders, European leaders, condemning Trump on social media. Starmer wisely kept his mouth shut, which is sensible. Starmer has to maintain and cultivate a good relationship with Donald Trump, and he knows it. So, very smart. But anyway, then you have the firebombing attack on the Starmer family house in Kentish Town. Now, this is a very, very strange thing, because, well, they appear to be Ukrainian rent boys, and the media is deeply uninterested in pursuing this, but social media sleuths decided to look up these men, because of course they're named, and they found their Instagram profiles, which were male models, foreign, basically Eastern European male models. I think one of them was Ukrainian, Romanian, two of them Ukrainian. But they're like male models with escorting services, and somehow they know where Keir Starmer lives, and they decided to firebomb his house, which is really weird. And in fact, at the end of this article, this is just really fascinating. Where is it? He gives a bit more insight. He says, we finished talking after this conversation. He sends a text to him afterwards. And he says, he sends a text saying that he thinks the firebomb attack on his home was another instance in his life when the public and private come into sharp tension. What are you saying here, Keir? These three male models from Ukraine and Eastern Europe, that's attacking your house. That's part of your private life, and that's just coming into tension with your public life. That's really, really weird. But anyway, going back, he tells us about how he's not using the firebomb excuse as an excuse and blame his advisors or anyone else for his mistakes. And the mistakes that he's talking about, again, this is so weird that, I think it's 4 now have actually been charged over firebombing his properties. It's like, right, 4 people have been charged for firebombing his houses, and that is just not interrogated in any of the media. They're just not interested as to why beautiful Ukrainian young men are firebombing the Prime Minister's properties. I mean, you'd think, oh my God, is this political? No, it's just private. It's just private. It's like, well, what are you doing with these young men in private that makes them want to firebomb you? Is just really the question I think a lot of journalists should be asking. But anyway, he got back from Ukraine to give this speech, the Island of Strangers speech. And he says, he was due to unveil the government's new immigration policy. It's fair to say I wasn't in the best state to make a big speech. Okay, but this wasn't off the cuff. This isn't something that you hadn't planned or had someone write for you in advance. So you gave this speech. Okay, you may not have delivered it well, and he's not a great speech giver anyway, but it's not like you misspoke. You had the thing written down, and you read it verbatim. He says, I was really, really worried. I almost said, I won't do the bloody press conference. Vic was really shaken up, but in truth, just was I. It was just a case of reading the words out and getting through it somehow so I could get back to them. This is after one of the arson attempts. Again, why this isn't a bigger issue, I just don't know. But anyway, so he gets to the bit where he says, we risk becoming an island of strangers. To many ears, that sounded a lot like Enoch Powell's famous Rivers of Blood speech half century earlier, where he said Britain's white population would be strangers in their own country. Right, so you were both right, right? Keir Starmer is right about calling us an island of strangers, and Enoch Powell was right that we'd become strangers in our own country. And in fact, the black man would have the whip hand over the white man. That's also true. That's what the 2-tier complaints are about. This is all things that are accurately representative of the experience of being English in England now. And look at this. Look at the way this goes on. The left denounced his speech as shameful and warned Starmer was dancing to the populist Reform Party's tune. Okay, tell me if it's inaccurate. Tell me if it's wrong. Tell me if it's a lie. Don't give me this it's not politically correct bullshit, because being politically correct is what brought us to this place. Starmer insists none of that is true, though. The speech was simply a mistake. Oh, was it? I wouldn't have used those words if I'd known they were, or even could be interpreted as, an echo of Enoch Powell. Well, I mean, it sounds very Powellite, to be honest. But Enoch Powell was a good man, and a great statesman, and the best Prime Minister we never had. But of course, I'm a right-winger, you're a communist. I suppose I would think that, and you would think that. He says, I had no idea, and my speechwriters didn't know either, because again, it's not like this was being done off the cuff, right? But that particular phrase, no, it wasn't right. I'll give you the honest truth, I deeply regret using it. So the only true thing he's ever actually said is something he has now taken back. And then he goes on essentially to play the victim. In fact, I saw Nick Dixon post this on Twitter just before I started recording this, and I think he's right. He said, look, the whole thing with this Observer piece is that basically Starmer would rather lose and be politically orthodox to the left than actually solve any of our problems. And that really is what comes out of this piece. And Starmer is going to sit there and go, well, you know, I don't do any self-reflection or anything like that, so I can't really explain to you how I'm feeling about this, because he's a fucking robot. But the point being, like, the fact that this is our country and our futures and our children's futures are just not his concern, right? He's concerned about the problems with the language in his forward to the policy document. You know, because, I mean, remember the speech said they've done incalculable damage to the country. This is totally true. These are totally true statements. And yet he's like, well, I shouldn't have said it. It wasn't right. I'll give you the honest truth. I deeply regret using it. I didn't think it sounded like Enoch Powell. I was just trying to talk about things as they really are. And I ended up sounding like Enoch bloody Powell. Of course you did. But anyway, so the point being is that I don't think Keir Starmer is going to last, right? And I said this about 6-8 months ago, something like that. And people were like, what? Why? Why do you think that? It's like, because he's got no faith. No one has any faith in him. And now he's facing a 120 MP backbench revolt. And where's he going to go? Like, where's he going to go for support? He has no support anywhere. Everyone hates him. He has been terrible. Frankly, he should just call a general election so we can get the Farage catastrophe of a government out of the way.